Hey everybody, this is Freddie with Scuba.com. Have I ever made a mistake diving? Well, you bet. Lots of them. Heck, I even jumped in the water the other day without my fins. How the heck does a guy do that after 50 years of diving? It made me think that there's a lot of common mistakes I see going on these days. Why don't we get to that in just a minute? So, you know, I'm a pretty fortunate guy. I get to dive a lot. And you would think I'd stay in practice, but do I make mistakes when I dive? Yeah, sometimes I do. And I think it can happen to us all. So I think it's a good thing to do to record some form of bringing some of the more common mistakes to your attention. Why? Because we can all, whether you're a seasoned diver, have hundreds of dives under your belt, or you're a brand new beginner, right? You can learn from that too. So why don't we just dive into it? Some of the more common mistakes that I see out there that result in, you know, some of the bigger problems that divers have. First, I think a lot of divers have the wrong gear. I can start out with the basics. We have videos that teach you how a mask should properly fit. But 95% of you out there have the wrong mask. Can't be me. If you come up with a ring around your face, you felt like you needed to tighten it down to keep the water out, your mask doesn't fit you. Okay? We have a video that'll teach you how. How about fins? Did you know that fins are supposed to fit a certain way? If your foot fits in the foot pocket and you can strap it on, you think it fits? Nah, that doesn't do it. Your fins should fit you properly so there's a balance between your shin muscles and your calf muscles. We have a video for that. Go check it out. But most people have fins that don't really fit them properly. Okay? So, how about other gear, right? The type of diving you're doing makes a huge difference. If you're going to dive cold water, you need a BC that holds a lot more lead than a regular BC for warm water diving. Why? Because you have thicker suits or dry suits, or you need more lead to hold you down, right? That's just the way it is. I've had people ask me, if I could just buy one set of gear and I could dive in Colorado in the cold water, or I could dive the Caribbean, what would that be? And I go, I can't answer the question because it's not a fair question. Different kinds of diving require different kinds of gear, and they rarely blend over into each other. Excuse me. Right? And there is a trend that a lot of dive shops are doing now that I don't agree with personally. They are selling tech gear to your average recreational diver. And the reason they're doing it is to make the sale, because that's kind of where the public is being led by advertisers. It's so common for people to walk through my door and they want a backplate BCD, for example. And I ask them, oh, are you a tech diver? Are you going to do side mount? Twins, what are you doing? What's that? I just want a BC. Well, okay, what kind of diving are you going to do? We're going to go to the Caribbean where it's nice and warm and I don't like cold water and all that. I'm like, why are you going to do a backplate, right? I mean, I know why. It's because they look cool. You see them in the advertisements and these divers come up and they're badass divers and they're all decked out with all this really cool stuff and I want to look like that when I dive. I get it. Except for, I think, purpose and comfort and confidence and understanding your gear is so much more important than that. Now, I'm not dogging you guys that are diving backplates. I'm not. There's a lot of back inflate BCs, travel BCs that are designed after the backplate design, but they've got a lot more comfort and all the parts and pieces are assembled and things like that. So I get it. I understand the back inflate and the reasons why and that sort of thing. But my point here is that a lot of people, they're just diving the wrong gear. They'll buy really cool gear, cool looking gear because of the way it looks and style, and it's not really practical for what they're doing. And they'll try to get away with using something in both kinds of diving. It would be like taking a dry suit to the warm water. Why would you do that? Unless you just freeze, right? But you wouldn't want to do that, and then you're not going to dive your 3 mil under the ice caps, right? So diving, they dive the wrong gear. The biggest mistake is the mask doesn't fit. The second is fins, and the rest is they just have gear that wasn't meant for the type of diving they're doing, or they're not using it for its intended purpose. Okay? Another big mistake I see divers making is poor equipment maintenance. I think if it were free, everybody would maintain their gear perfectly, right? It's just the fact that it's kind of expensive to do, and I didn't even hardly use it. I only used it one trip last year, and I'm getting ready to go on another trip this year. Why do I need to pay all that money to service my gear? Well, life support, that's the reason. Not because I want to make more money on you, but I'll be the first to confess to you that I believe some of the manufacturer's requirements are a little bit too stringent. For example, they might say service it every year. Well, can you get away with 2? Yeah, I think you can. Most of the time, that's my professional opinion. We service gear, and I think you can go 2 years, even if it says 1. Now, you'll violate your warranty, but do you really need the warranty on it after a year anyway, okay? If it's serviced properly, no, you don't. Some of them say every 3 years. So could you get away with a 4th? Yeah, on that equipment, probably so. It's not the same though. The reg that says 3 years is for a purpose than the one that says a year. They're different. Like the Atomic, they're all titanium metal and the parts don't score or wear out near as fast, and harder materials, different things like that, okay? So don't assume because one reg can be serviced for 3 years that they all could. You know, rubber dries out and splits, so sometimes it matters where you're from. You know, we're from Colorado. It's very arid here. There's not much moisture, and therefore things dry out. Lubrication dries up, rubber cracks and splits, even when it's stored in the closet at home. So, you know, sometimes that affects where you store it. For example, if you're in Florida and you store it in the outdoor shed, man, it gets hot. So your gear's out there cooking. Okay, so it can make a difference, right? Shims wear out. You'd be really surprised if you took a regulator apart and you saw the tiny little piece, a high pressure seat. It's about that big, smaller than a pencil eraser, and that's what stops your reg from free flowing or leaking almost all the time, and that can go bad fairly quickly. It's compressed by a spring 365 days a year, 24/7. So eventually when you start using it, it has grooves in the high pressure seat and it can start to leak air. So it does, you know, need service even if you didn't use it. Okay? Another one is tricky to explain because you're used to looking online and buying used gear. So you buy used gear, you have to pretty much understand that gear fairly well. So if you understand dive gear, great. Go online and buy used gear. But if you don't really understand it, I'm going to say do some good research to try to get yourself confident that it's good. And that doesn't mean the picture looks really good, because I can sell a wetsuit that's worn out. It looks brand new. The photo says no scratches, no cuts, no tears. Zippers work perfectly, but it has 101 dives on it. And many of your base wetsuits will wear out after 100 dives. Now, some can go as many as 450, 500 dives, okay? And if you don't know the difference, then buyer beware online, right? How about regulators? You know, in 2001, they changed the regulations that all regulators in the United States be sold. If they fail, they must fail open. Prior to that, they could fail closed. We're not even supposed to really service regs prior to 2001. But a lot of divers don't use their gear that much, so, you know, pop dies. Unfortunately, the kids sell the gear online. They're not doing anything unscrupulous. They don't know. And they sell his regulator that was purchased in 1999. Hardly used, still in the box. The chrome is still shiny, but it's unsafe. Okay, so used gear, sometimes it's buyer beware. Now, if a reputable shop buys used gear, they know what they're getting. I know what to buy. I know how to buy it if I buy it from somebody, whether they brought it to me or I bought it online. I service it before I sell it. It's modern equipment, right? And then I feel comfortable with what the customer is going to get, okay? But they get it from me rather than just buying it online. I've honestly had people bring me boxes of gear they bought online they were so proud of. I only spent $150. I got a BC, a reg, and all this dive gear. And I go, huh, okay, great. It's going in the trash because you're not going to service that reg. That BC doesn't work anymore. You know, all different kinds of reasons. Another mistake that I think divers make, and this goes back to the basics really, is no pre-dive check. For some reason, we get this in our head that when you have tons of dives under your belt, You don't need to do the basics anymore. You know, that brand new diver that's counting on their fingers all the different acronyms of, you know, check my air, check my BC, check my, you know, all these kind of things. It's still a good idea. Do you know my dive gear? Well, if I'm your dive buddy, I want you to know my dive gear. Because if you need my second air source, I need you to know where it is, what kind it is. So that's the basics. How about, is my tank on properly? Lots of mistakes out there when people don't even turn their air on all the way, or somebody turned it back off and then cracked it a quarter thinking they were opening it. So no pre-dive check. I see a lot of people make that mistake. Check your buddy out, okay? Here's probably one of the most common mistakes out there, and that is most divers today, they dive too far away from their buddy. We've been lulled into a false sense of security because we have two regulators, right? I have my primary, and if it fails, I just go to my backup. So I don't need a dive buddy, do I? Yeah, you do. Because there's all kinds of things that can go wrong that have nothing to do with you not having a second regulator, okay? So diving too distant from your dive buddy, you just watch. You're getting ready to go on a trip, you just watch. And you'll see dive buddies, and sometimes you can't even find the other one. Or sometimes one's down, you know, 30 feet deeper, or 30, 40 feet away from the other one. There is a reason why you stick closer together, and it's for those reasons you can't predict ahead of time. It's the mistakes that happen that get you. Okay? So diving too far away from your dive buddy, I consider a big, big mistake. Have that conversation. If they're a photographer and they linger, have the conversation ahead of time. And, you know, if it's super shallow water, I get it. If you can just surface 20 feet away, yeah, that's a different dive than if you're 50, 60, 70, 80 feet away. Okay? So lots of stories on how that can be a problem, being too far away from your buddy. Here's another one that I think is also common. I think people tend to trust their past experience. And if it's been a while, so you haven't been diving for a while, maybe it's been 3, 4, 5 years, 8 years, 10 years, 15 years since you went diving, I think it's a good idea to do some form of a refresher on your training before you dive, right? The basics that you're going to need is how to assemble your gear, right? We teach refreshers. It's not expensive. So if you're getting ready to go on a trip, you're not super confident, go to your local dive shop and say, do you have a refresher course? And they're going to. And they're going to have different levels of them depending on how much you need. You don't have to take the whole course again. I'm just talking about a quick you know, refresher of the basic skills needed for safety, confidence, and comfort. So how do you, if your mask gets knocked off your face, how do you put it back on and clear it? Well, you remember, you need to practice a little bit before you go on your dive. How about your regulator gets plucked out of your mouth, or you run out of air and you have to switch to somebody else? Do you remember to press the purge button to evacuate, or did you try to inhale and get a little water? That's no good, right? So a refresher course usually is a one evening or one day course. They're going to go through the basics of how to put the regulator back on the tank, how to assemble it properly, get your BC set to the way your body is so it fits you properly, and some of your skills like mask and regulator replacement underwater, maybe even the giant stride again or the back roll into the water. You know, you need a refresher before you go if it's been a little while. Don't just try to figure it out 5 minutes before you get in the water. Okay, this other one can have some tragic consequences, and that is many people don't understand their dive equipment. That's a pretty broad statement, and probably the most common one I see is people don't understand their dive computer. I know people that have no idea how to work their dive computer. They've owned it for years. They dive with it regular. All they care about is if it comes up with the right screen and it says how deep they are, how much air they have left in their tank. But they don't know what all the beeps and the gauges and the, you know, flashy little things do on their dive computer. But that can be life support, okay? Another thing is, with a dive computer, for example, if you don't own one, do you know how to work the one that you're going to rent when you get to the dive trip? No. You've never seen it before. It's not the same one that you learned on when you got your certification course. So how do you know how it works? You better ask somebody to give you a little bit of a course on how it works when you're there, not just the basics, right? You need to know what the little flashy things and the little beeps mean and all that kind of stuff, okay? I can't tell you how many people come up to me on a dive trip and they go, Freddie, I've never seen this one before. How do you work it? And I go, I don't know. I've never seen it before either, right? Even though most of them are similar, okay? How about little things like digital gauges? I was diving with a couple, and they both had these really cool digital gauges. And I go, but you guys don't have a dive computer? Oh yeah, we do. It's right here. I go, that's not a dive computer. That's a digital gauge. Oh, well, it does the same thing. No, it doesn't. It might give you more information than a round pressure gauge with a needle in it. Temperature, depth, time, things like that. But in reality, it's not the same as a dive computer. It doesn't calculate anything to do with the bends, your surface interval. It doesn't do any of that. It just gives you information. So how about alarms? What your alarms mean underwater? How about the type of BC dump you have? Most people are used to grabbing their inflator, raising it above their head and dump it. And that's the way you were trained, so that's what you know. But in reality, if it's tethered to you, when you lift it up, it doesn't go all the way, and when you dump it, you're not dumping out all the air, so it's not really working effectively. When most nicer BCs today have a stainless steel cord on the inside that it has a dump attached to the inflator. You grab the hard part and you pull down. It dumps the valve. You don't have to untether it. You know where it is exactly. It's not floating around anywhere. Perfect. Do you know about that? I mean, I could go on and on and on. If you're night diving, do you know that most high-end, nice flashlights have some sort of an emergency function to them besides just turning the flashlight on and off? Many of them have flashing. Some of them have actually an SOS signal. It can be seen a long distance for night dives. You can signal a boat, right? If yours has it, you should learn how to use it, right? You might need it underwater or on the surface. Know that most of the gear out there in the world is going to be a little different than the rental gear that you trained on, whether it's BC type. Were you trained with a weight belt, or were you trained with integrated weights on your BC, right? So just understand your equipment. Take the time, do some research, ask some other divers that know. Look online. There's lots of videos. We have lots of videos for different kinds of equipment, right? And then learn how to use yours. Now, here's another very common thing, and it is a little bit of our fault, ours meaning the trainers, the educators. Most divers out there are overweighted. They have too much lead in their BCD, okay? Why is it our fault? Because we trained you that way. There's a reason why. If you have 6 students in front of you and you're kneeling on the bottom of a pool or hovering in the pool, they haven't figured out buoyancy yet. They're just not hovering in one place. They're either too heavy or too light. Well, if they're too light, you can't keep pulling down divers, you know, when they start to float away. And they can't sit here and do this the whole time. So what do? We put a little more lead in your BC than is normally needed because you're a beginner. Well, many people mature in their dive career thinking that's proper. This is how much lead I use. Oh, wow, that's way too much. So how do they combat that? They put air in their BC. I'm going to tell you, and I'm willing to go toe-to-toe with anybody. I know I'm going to get comments on this because I always do. You're supposed to have 0 air in your BC. 0 air in your BC. Okay? How did we possibly dive before they invented the BCD bladder? Right? Proper weighting is the key. Make your weight perfect. You won't need a drop of air in your BC. Think about it. A little bit of air in your BC, every foot you go down, the buoyancy is less. Every foot you come up, it grows. So if you're always adding air and dumping air, you're making a mistake, okay? Which leads me to buoyancy training. I think it should be mandatory. I wish it were. In the old days, it was. Because it's the #1 skill you need in scuba diving. If you haven't been trained in buoyancy, or if you struggle with your buoyancy, go ahead and go take a course. It's worth the money because it is the #1 skill. You're not going to walk away from that course being a master. You need to practice. But if you can't control your buoyancy perfectly just by breathing, then you don't have it figured out completely yet. And it takes a number of dives before your brain even figures it out. Believe it or not, a brand new diver can't do it properly because their brain's trying to keep them alive. They inflate their lungs too much. Not like you're inflating your lungs while you're watching this video, just a little bit, exhale. We have videos on that, and we're making more in depth. We're gonna do the whole course, the whole buoyancy course, and you can watch it for free, okay? But I'm doing it because it's the #1 skill you need, okay? So check out your buoyancy. The next skill would be going beyond your training. Now this is pretty broad, and if you're just open water trained, then you don't have any training except for the basics. So you need a lot of practice, and you need some, just start diving and you'll get the experience and you'll get better. But does that mean you are qualified to go dive that wreck? These other divers are going through it, why can't you? Well, for example, in the wreck training, you learn that there's more than one kind of a wreck. For example, you have wrecks that were prepared for divers. They were stripped. All the wiring's gone, all the insulation's gone, the glass is out of it, a lot of them, the mechanicals are out of it, and there's holes cut in it everywhere, so if you get in and get nervous, you can get out. But then there's the wreck that was sunk in World War II. Everything's intact, and the insulation is everywhere, and that'll snag you. It's, it'll get in your way. Wires grab onto your tanks and all those kind of things like that. So, the different kind of wreck, and you need training in that. Now, if you're in the Bahamas, you want to go through that big wreck where it's just big wide open and you want to go through and you can see the light on the other side, great, that's how you start your experience. If you have a friend that just loves wreck diving and they want to hold your hand and take you through and make sure you're safe and explain things to you, okay, that's training you didn't have to pay for, but that's okay. But there are also courses available to you if you really want to know. The rule of thirds. Do you know what that is? If you don't know what that is, then you need some training, right? And what it is you can dive into the wreck on 1/3 of the air in your tank. You exit with the second third, and you have a third in the spare. Same thing for Ks, right? You need to know those things. So night diving, drift diving. I can't tell you how many people hate drift dives because the first experience they have was out of control, swimming against the current, running out of air, hanging onto the sponges to hold still because everybody was behind them, surfacing too far from the boat. I mean, doesn't that sound kind of hectic and crazy? Why does anybody like drift diving? Well, if you learn and you know how to do it right, it's a wonderful, wonderful, pleasurable experience, a great kind of dive. I love drift diving, okay? And it's because we do it right. And I love to practice, I love to play, it's fun, it's like riding a roller coaster sometimes, and it's a different kind of thing. So don't go beyond your skill unless you have some measure of somebody to help you, whether it's training or an experienced diver. Okay, so this next one is more commonly after the dive. I see a lot of people that kind of neglect their ears. That's a weird thing to call a dive mistake, I know, except it's going to interfere with your dive career. If you're on a long trip, a week, 10 days, 2 weeks, if you're not taking care of your ears some way, shape, or form, many of us are going to have some problem. By the third day, it's getting sore, right? That could be because you're pushing too hard when you equalize, because you're doing it at too great of degrees of depth, right? Or you start too late and you have to push harder, right? It also could be maybe a small infection has started. Maybe your ears aren't exactly the same, how big the eustachian tubes are, so you have to over-pressurize to get the one to go. There are tricks. There's gear you can wear, like certain earplugs made for diving. We have videos on that. There's certain liquids you can put in there that kills all bacteria, different things like that. So your ears are something that you should take care of. And if you've ever experienced a really bad ear infection on the inside of the ear canal after you get done with a dive trip, you're going to know what I'm talking about because you feel like there's something wrong. Like maybe I'm going to go deaf, or it's so painful you can't even hardly chew anything. And just knowing how to take care of your ears ahead of time is really valuable information. And we have a lot of video, tutorial on how to do that and the products you're going to want. So check those out. Okay, I'm at the last one, and it's perhaps the worst one, the worst mistake that most divers can make that I can think of. And I'm going to call it complacency. We grow complacent with time. I'm a good diver. I have hundreds of dives under my belt. I don't make those basic mistakes that those other guys make, so I'm fine. Except when you're not, right? I mentioned it in the opening that not too long ago I jumped in the water without my fins. I mean, I have thousands of dives. I've been diving over 50 years. And how do you make that kind of mistake, right? Sometimes we just lose focus, or we're concentrated on something else that's kind of important. Well, the last time to find that out is underwater. So we can all become complacent, but assuming that everything's going to go just like it did last time. Safe, comfortable, everything's good. Just making that assumption is a mistake in itself, because there's always something, even out of your control, that you aren't going to plan on. Okay? Anybody who's ever run out of air, sucked the tank dry, whose fault was it? It was theirs. It was mine. I made that mistake. How did that happen? My gauges worked fine. I mean, could I give you an excuse? Yeah. I was so mesmerized by what I was watching that I didn't pay attention. And it happened to me, okay? Thankfully, I was trained to go through a scenario like that, and here I am today, okay? But complacency, it's absolutely the #1 mistake. So there's nothing wrong with reviewing the basics, going back to the basics, and covering some of the things that have happened to other divers. If you start that story in a room with divers, you'll be there for hours. They'll all talk about their stories and little things that, if they're honest, they'll admit has happened. So it can happen to all of us, right? So now I want to mention that this was kind of a longer video, but it's actually the shorter, more condensed version. I get into a lot more detail in the other video that talks about the mistakes for this. So if you have the time and you feel like you want to go into a little more in depth, check that video out. But I'm doing this to hopefully make you a safer diver, more confident, more comfortable in the water, and you're going to keep on diving, and hopefully we can stop people from making some of the more basic mistakes that get them in trouble. All right? So I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day. Wasn't that fun? Tips and tricks. It makes us all better. That's why we do it, to help you in some way. If you know of a tip, or if you would like a tip on a specific area, just let us know in the comments below. And if you could help us out, hit the like button. And if you know someone else who might benefit from these tips and tricks, why don't you send it off to them and share it with them? And if you haven't already, why don't you hit that subscribe button? Then you'll know when the next one comes out. Make it a great day.